All right, friends and neighbors, welcome back to another instructional video from Professor H. As promised, what we're going to be going through is an IP version 6 topology, and I'm following right along with Chapter 8 in the Packet Guide to Core Network Protocol. So if you have a copy, terrific. If you don't, you might want to go out and get one to make it a little easier to follow along. But in any case, we're just going to take the images out of there and go right through it step by step. Now what I'd like to do first is go through an IP version 4 example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and keep these videos reasonably short so you can kind of sit down and go through them without spending your entire afternoon. So I'm going to chop them up into pieces, and this first piece will be this IP version 4 example. Now this particular topology, what we see here is that we've got two networks. The 192.168 1.0 network and 192.168 2.0 networks. They're separated by a router, of course, in the middle there. And I've given you some addressing there. So the hosts on the 1.0 network are 1.1, 1.2, and the router is 1.254. On the other side, we've got 2.1 and 2.254 as the router interfaces. So what kind of stuff would we expect on a network like this? Well, clearly, if we're going to set up the hosts and we want everybody to be able to talk to everybody else, what will happen is that the hosts on the left side will use 1.254 as their default gateway. Remember, the default gateway is just another name for a router that gets you off of your network. The hosts on the right would use 192.168 2.254. And to close out the routing on the network, the router itself would have a routing table of two directly connected routes, 192.168 1.0 and 192.168 2.0, and these would be associated with interfaces F0/0 and F0/1 respectively. Now the traffic on the network is pretty straightforward. Hopefully by this point, if you're looking at this for IP version 6, you have a pretty good handle on IP version 4 traffic. Nodes on either side of the router can talk directly to each other. Now this means that they're on the same wire or the same layer 2 network. Hosts 1.1, 1.2, and even the router 1.254 can talk directly to each other. This means that they can ARP for each other. They can send ICMP echoes to each other, as we might see from ping. And when nodes are sending traffic to each other, the frames will use the MAC addresses and IP addresses of the destination in the same frame. And of course, the source addressing would be for the MAC and IP of the source. Now this changes quite a bit when you're going across a router. So for example, nodes on the 1 network trying to communicate with nodes on the 2 network would have to first ARP for their default gateway, and then they would use the IP address of the destination but the MAC address of the gateway. So for example, if 1.1 was to try to communicate with 2.1, he would ARP for the gateway, 1.254, and then forward the frame to the router, and then the router would send it on to 2.1. So the MAC address that would be used in the Ethernet frame would be the MAC address of the router on that side, F0/0, or the interface on that side. But the IP destination would be 2.1. And again, hopefully you've got your head wrapped around that stuff and we don't need to spend too much time on that. Although, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. All right, so let's return to our topology here real quick. And as a reminder, we've got our hosts there and the MAC addresses of the hosts and the routers and the IP addresses that we would use. Now to finish up the last part of this IP version 4 discussion, we have a host routing table. Now, all of the hosts would have a routing table similar to this one. And what we're looking at here is all of those common IP addresses that we're used to using. We've got multicast here, limited broadcast, directed broadcast. We can see that there's a host routing table entry for itself. In this case, we're looking at hosts 192.168 1.2's routing address, or host routing table. And then we've got some loopback stuff in there. And then finally up there at the top, we've got that default gateway of 192.168.1.254. All right. Now, hopefully, again, you've got your head wrapped around how the forwarding on this particular topology would work and how the addressing would work and the types of messages that we might see. We're going to see here as we tackle IP version 6 that this changes quite a bit. Not only will the addressing change, obviously, but the behavior of the network changes quite a bit, and even the messages that we use on the network. By the way, if you were a little confused about that whole host routing thing and how forwarding on a network operates, then you can take a look at Chapter 2 of the Packet Guide to Routing and Switching. All right, that'll do it for Part 1 here. I'll label these as Part 1, 2, 3, and so on. Feel free to stop by brucehartbunts.com to pick up some extra content there. And, of course, you've got the YouTube channel here. If you haven't taken a look at the Packet of the Week videos or the other networking videos, feel free to browse around. And, of course, as a reminder, we're going through Chapter 8 in the Packet Guide to Core Network Protocols from O'Reilly Publishing. Thanks again for stopping by, and may your packets always reach their destinations.